SACP General Secretary Bladen Nzimande will address the Communist Party's 98th anniversary rally in Ermelo in Mpumalanga today. He will reflect on the 98 years history of communism in this country and also map the way forward. He's also expected to speak on the current socioeconomic and political challenges facing the country, including state capture. Other leaders from the tripartite alliance will also be in attendance. For analysis on the SACP's 98th anniversary, we're now joined via Skype by political analyst, Professor Dirk Kotze. A very good morning to you, Prof. What are you expecting to come out of this 98th anniversary of the SACP?
I think what they are going to concentrate on is the economic situation in South Africa at the moment. That is very much within the purview of the Communist Party. You know, they focus on socio-economic matters as a matter of principle, and therefore we expect that you should pay a lot of attention to that.
In your analysis, has this party added value to the South African political and economic discourse? Okay, I think the professor was trying to say something there. All right, we're going to try to reconnect with the professor. All right, earlier our reporter Tumelo Machoho spoke to SACP spokesperson Dr Alex Mashilo.
Thank you very much. The party was founded in July 1921. It has seen a lot on its way of development. It has overcome many challenges in the struggle to achieve liberation and social emancipation in South Africa. The SACP was the first political organization in South Africa to be banned by the apartheid regime. In one of the first laws that regime adopted, immediately it was inaugurated. It survived underground, and of course when the other organizations were banned 10 years later, the SACP had already generated experience of survival in underground organization as well as in exile. Now we are going to be reflecting on the 98 years of existence historically of the SACP, but we will also discuss present issues facing our people. As you know, the majority of our people is the working class, and this working class comprises poor people. As we speak at the moment, 10.3 million of South Africans are unemployed. So we are not going to be looking back relating to history as a series of past events, but history in terms of what presently must be done in order to create employment for the unemployed, in order to uplift the poor out of poverty, in order to systematically eliminate persisting inequalities.
Also, do you think now that, like you guys have been on with the socialism idea, do you think that idea, how far are you guys to reaching that idea to make sure that we are a socialist country, because you guys are pushing for a socialism within the country? Do you think that message is getting to the people, is getting to the people's ears, especially on the ground?
It is taking long, because if you will recall, the processes leading up to the SACP started in 1914. During opposition by communist militants against imperialist war, which we regarded as a war of imperialist rivalries and colonial interests. Look at the period from 1914 to 1994, when we managed to dislodge the apartheid regime. That great achievement of dislodging the apartheid regime was only one step, one major breakthrough towards socialism. What we need to do now is to put in place programs to improve the quality of life of our people, to introduce socialist-oriented measures which take us forward to the achievement of socialism under our democratic conditions. Remember that socialism is the highest form of democracy. It is democracy for the majority. And when we talk about democracy for the majority, that includes democracy in the ownership and control of the means of production as well as the proceeds of production. At present, the majority of our people, at least the 16 million who are working, are producing wealth, but that wealth goes to those who privately own the resources of production, and what remains in the hands of the people are peanut wages, and the people cannot move forward. So socialism is a higher form of democracy. It's the most advanced form of democracy, better than what you see going on in production and determining overall social relations in society at the present moment.
Will you guys eventually run for election? Will you guys eventually contest the elections? Especially we've seen that you guys try to do that in a free state with one municipality. It's even in 2 years now time, the municipality are going to the elections. Do you guys think that the party is ready to contest elections?
The core philosophy of the Communist Party is to unite all working people. Once we have achieved the unity of all working people, we must now move in every step that we take with them. Our philosophy is not a separatist philosophy. It is a philosophy to move with the people in every step that we are taking. Now, immediately you ask us to walk away from the people, you are destroying our philosophy. And when you destroy that philosophy of unity, you are liquidating the party. But we have a discussion in the party about better ways of improving how we contest elections. At the moment, we are focused on achieving a reconfiguration of our alliance, on building a widest possible patriotic front to defend our constitution and democracy, and on unifying the working class in what we refer to as a popular left front.
Let's try and reconnect back with Professor Kotze, who we're talking to via Skype. Prof, welcome once again. When we broke off, we were talking about what value the Communist Party has added to the South African political and economic discourse and operations.
Well, they first of all introduced a very strong class analysis of the South African society from 1915, when the International Socialist League was formed, then in 1921, when the Communist Party of South Africa was formed, and since then in their alliance with the ANC. They developed this notion of colonialism of a special type, which they announced in their program in 1962. At the same time, in the early 1960s, they also introduced this notion of a two-stage theory of liberation. The first one as the National Democratic Revolution, and the second one as the Socialist Revolution. Together with that, also in the early 1960s, from 1969 onwards, they were one of the main driving forces for the formation of Umkhonto we Sizwe. Because when Umkhonto we Sizwe was formed, it wasn't actually the armed wing of the ANC. It was an armed wing that was mainly formed by the Communist Party, and the ANC later became part of that. And since then, throughout the periods, the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, the Communist Party made a major contribution to the link to the Eastern Bloc specifically, and very much the Soviet Union in terms of providing of support to the ANC and the alliance in general, training for ANC leaders. We think about someone like President Mbeki that was part of that process. And in that sense, the Communist Party provided very much an international link, or link to the international community for the ANC.
In fact, you're talking about the National Democratic Revolution, a slogan that they continue to use in trying to change the South African poverty situation. Have they been able to make headway here?
Well, in terms of the official theory or philosophy about that, that's the responsibility actually of the ANC. Their responsibility is the second part of it, which is more the socialist one. But I think where the Communist Party comes in since 1990 or 1994 is to be a voice from the left in order to reprimand or to conscientize the ANC about the needs of the poor persons and the working class in very specifically. The relationship between COSATU and the Communist Party was always a very close one. But I think more lately, the Communist Party has become absorbed in the factional politics of the ANC. And I think that is the criticism that exists at the moment, is that they are not anymore really a voice of their own to articulate these matters, but have become too much embroiled within the ANC's factional politics.
Part of their theme is socialism is the future. When you take into consideration the unemployment figures that came out this week, is this realistic? Should South Africa be looking at going this way?
Well, from their side, obviously, yes. I think what many people are saying is that there is a middle ground in between, and that is more of a social democratic dispensation, very much that was in the past used in Scandinavian countries like Sweden or Norway or Denmark or others. And to a large extent, that was the ANC's plan with the Reconstruction and Development Plan in 1994. And many people are believing that that is the way in which we should go again, that there has become too much emphasis on the so-called neoliberal approach, especially in the Mbeki period and thereafter, and that it hasn't really addressed the socio-economic conditions in South Africa. So, I think what we are experiencing is obviously a global problem. We have the same problems in countries like Brazil, like even in a place like Greece, where they have serious economic problems. So I think what we are talking about is about how is the international situation going to change, because many of the issues that we are suffering from are also being present in many other countries.
Prof, what you're referring to as the middle ground is a conversation that's being held globally with others talking about the other way. How does this all contribute to the conversation of ideologies around the world and new ways of thinking?
Well, there has been in the past, for example, in Britain there was this notion of Labour Party of the third way, which was now obviously during the beginning of the Tony Blair period. Mm-hmm. And I think the ANC to some extent tries to link themselves to that type of notion. I think one of the main problems since the economic recession of 2008 is that created an economic crisis that hasn't been really resolved. And the question from the left's point of view is that there must be a restructuring of the global economy. It's not something which can only be done in one country. If we take South Africa as an example, South Africa's economy has been so much globalized that what is happening when a decision is taken by the American Federal Reserve about interest rates, it immediately affects the South African rand, that we've seen this week again. So it's not anymore that South African decision makers can decide about the South African economy more or less in isolation on its own. And I think that is the debate that is starting to develop. And hopefully, for example, in a forum like the G20, where South Africa is a member of, or in BRICS, that this type of debate hopefully will start to emerge.
Now, for years, the Communist Party has been flip-flopping around the idea of whether to contest elections on their own or not. For this past election in May, for the first time, they contested at a local level, at a provincial level. Is this going to work out for them? Will we see a Communist Party one day that is out there campaigning as the Communist Party outside of the tripartite alliance, successfully so at a national level?
Well, the Communist Party has been relatively successful in the local government election more than a year ago at Metsimahole, around Sasolburg. And there they became influential in giving the ANC a majority. I think the problem of the ANC, of the Communist Party, as well as a trade union workers' party, is the fact that their membership has been always very small. At the moment, the Communist Party's membership is around about 220,000 members, compared to the ANC that has close to 1 million members. So I think the main problem is that there is not, while we have seen it again in this past local, provincial and national election, is that the parties on the left, for some of other reasons, just cannot mobilize support. And the same applies, will apply, I guess, to a Communist Party also. And I think that was one of the main reasons why they haven't really seriously become involved in campaigning on their own, over and above obviously their relationship with the ANC. But there seems to be a sort of a middle ground amongst the South African electorate, which is maybe left of the center, but is not completely left. And I think that's the main headache of parties like, for example, the one that campaigned in this past election of Irvin Jim and the United Front that was in the past campaigning, and others who are struggling to get sufficient support from a leftist position. I think what it is that most persons in a leftist position are involved in trade unions, are more in the urban areas and not in rural areas. Those in rural areas are more inclined, I would say, towards a more social democratic position, and that's where large numbers are.
Prof, you're talking about the small numbers, and I'm going to take away from a Bible saying that says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am amongst them. They might only have 200,000 members, but are they influential, especially in the tripartite?
They have been in the past very much influential. I think lately, and that's what I said earlier about the factional politics, they've become aligned to specific factions. Yeah. And that have taken away some of the influence in the ANC. Initially, they were part of President Zuma, and when he was elected in 2007, I think they expected that he would move towards the left after President Mbeki. That didn't really materialize. At the same time, some senior persons within the Communist Party were criticized and acted against, like Ivan Pillay in SARS, who is a very important senior position in the Communist Party. Pravin Gordhan, the same. And I think that led partly to the move away from President Zuma towards President Ramaphosa, who has more of a trade union background, together with the former President Kgalema Motlanthe. So these things became more important than really the ideological or the philosophical content of the Communist Party's message. And I think there they lost quite a lot of the influence within the alliance.
When you speak of the factional politics, the SACP has come out recently in support or opposition to certain government or political positions. The second Deputy Secretary General, or the Deputy Secretary General, Solima Paila, coming out to say that they support the call for the public protector's position to be reviewed, and also making pronouncements on the Zondo Commission. Is this hurting their brand, or is it helping them?
No, it's actually not part of their brand. It's part of the more day-to-day politics. The Communist Party normally has more of a ideological or philosophical approach to matters about socioeconomic conditions in the country, about the position of workers, about the role of trade unions, about class as a factor in society, or the interplay between class and race in society. And that part of the argument, or the part of the political discourse, to a large extent has disappeared. It's not so pronounced from their side. There's not a specific left identity given to that debate. And I think that is where the Communist Party is lacking in terms of the contribution that they can make to the public debate.
So as we are in 2019 and a lot of questions being asked about the tripartite alliance, especially in terms of COSATU, which has a president who's hardly ever heard or seen, and her deputies seen all around making contradictory statements, what can we say is the future of this coming together of the SACP, COSATU and the ANC?
I think the alliances will continue for the foreseeable future. I think, however, as the ANC has also declined in terms of electoral support, the same happened to COSATU. COSATU lost almost half of their membership in the past 5-6 years. while it had almost 2 million members, it's now just close to 1 million members. You think about what happened to the National Union of Mine Workers and how they have lost support. Other unions also, they've become mainly a trade union movement of public sector unions. But in the private sector, they've lost a lot of support. So in that sense, the tripartite alliance in general has lost support amongst the public in South Africa. And I think that is reflected also in the way in which the ANC has, in a sense, struggled with this past national and provincial election. Take, for example, Gauteng, how they've received a very, very small majority and lost earlier the metros. So I think that's indicative also of what is possibly happening with the alliance in totality. Although I don't foresee in the near future that they are going to split up or that they are going to lose one or so members within the alliance.
You touched a bit on Pravin Gordhan earlier, who's a communist, the SACP General Secretary, Dr. Blade Nzimande, being the Minister of Higher Education in government. Have these and other SACP members who are active in government brought through their clear ideologies that show where they're wanting, they're striving to take the country?
Not necessarily. If you think about ministers like, for example, Minister Jeff Radebe, who's also been a very prominent member of the SACP, or the former Minister of Trade and Industry, or Ibrahim Patel, you don't necessarily hear a sort of a very specific Marxist or communist rhetoric coming from their side. During the time of President Mbeki, some of them have been placed in really the key positions in the economic cluster. And someone like Jeremy Cronin was for a long time, for example, the Deputy Minister of Public Enterprises also, or Public Works rather. And therefore there were ample opportunity for them to exercise their influence or let their influence be felt in it, and that hasn't happened. I think overall what one should say, it's summarized by a booklet that was written by Joe Slover just after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and that was called Socialism Failed. And in the end, he spoke more about Stalinism and the wrong implementation of Marxism or socialism, and not so much about the political dynamics of what happened then, including in South Africa. And the South African Communist Party, I think, has, in that sense, not come up with an alternative after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And therefore, their relevance, their impact on the South African society has declined in the same way. So what many people are asking for, is there a new form of post-1990 or post-1989 form of socialism that can be applied in a country like South Africa, and not the old form of socialism or Marxism? And the Communist Party in South Africa has not yet presented something like that. And I think that is, in a sense, the failure of the party so far.
Not a good indictment on their case. Thank you so much for making the time to talk to us, Prof. But just to end off, you were talking about factional politics, and another breaking story this weekend about leaked emails about the funding of the president of the ANC, who's also the state president, the funding of his campaign in taking the helm at the African National Congress. Your thoughts about this conversation?
No, we don't have yet the side of President Ramaphosa on this. I think he's embroiled at this stage in a very, very sensitive situation. It can definitely hurt him if he does not have clear answers about this. He is in court, and I think the part where the public protector is involved, he will most possibly be successful to set that report aside in that review process. But the broader discussion about what happened during the time of the election for the ANC president and the campaign for that, I think this is going to become quite a sensitive matter for the ANC in general. because as we know, there were other candidates also involved. At the moment, the focus is on him, but I think over time it will broaden to see what happened in general with all and what is supposed to become an approach by the ANC with respect to how to deal with funding in general. We've heard now from some pronouncements made after the last National Executive Committee meeting of how it's damaging the ANC internally. There's processes of money playing a role in the election processes of the ANC and how that can be detrimental to it. So I think it's very important that for the ANC itself that they come out clear on this and have a clear procedure for the future. But how President Ramaphosa is going to deal with this, I hope he has clear answers for all of us.
Why do you say he'll be able to prevail in the courts in terms of the public protector's assertions?
Because her mandate as a public protector is very much more restricted. For example, the investigation into political parties, I'm not particularly convinced that is within her mandate. Her mandate is about investigating matters of state, as well as where governments, the three spheres of government, are involved in public administration. Now, it is possible to argue that, for example, a campaign within the DA, for example, for their leadership, falls outside that domain. If it applies to the DA, then it must apply to the ANC also. Because there was a former investigation about the funding for Musi Maimane when he was campaigning for his own position as leader of the DA. And I think so in that sense, there's going to be questions about to what extent did the public protector go beyond what was referred to her for this investigation.
The leadership of the economic freedom fighters were quite receptive of these emails yesterday, putting them out on social media as well. What do you think is the interest of the EFF in the removal of President Cyril Ramaphosa or Pravin Gordhan?
I think what they first of all want to demonstrate is their influence in South African politics in general, that they are really the kingmaker. I think what has happened with the EFF lately is that when they announced that they are withdrawing from supporting or working together with the DA at metropolitan level, the local government level, they expected that it will create a really serious crisis for the DA. That didn't materialize. Instead, the ANC supported the DA in Tshwane, for example, to approve the budget. So the EFF is also in a position where they have to reconsider their strategy in general, their political strategy. And if they become successful in creating a crisis for President Ramaphosa, to such an extent that it directly affects him and his position, it can be a major boost for the EFF. There's other speculation also about their own involvement, for example, in the VBS Bank in Venda and others. I'm not so sure if I can give some comments on that because I don't have concrete evidence about that. But I think in terms that the EFF is certainly trying to position themselves in a key role in South African politics. The fact that they did well in the last national election, but not as well as I think they would have liked, they have still half the number of seats and support as that of the DA in Parliament, for example, means that they are still a relatively small party. And therefore they are now putting themselves in a position where they are, in a sense, disproportionately exercising influence in South African politics, or at least they try to do it that way.
Prof, thank you so much for the extended interview and thanks for your time. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you very much. Professor Dirk Kotze there, talking about the Communist Party's event today in Mpumalanga, but also other varied national issues. Let's take a break.